Sunday is PTSD Awareness Day, and many people around the world suffer in silence from post-traumatic stress disorder. In the United States, an estimated 7.8% of Americans will experience PTSD at some point in their lives. But what exactly is PTSD, and are there ways that faith can help us in recovery? Joining us now is Allison Ricciardi, founder and president of CatholicTherapist.com. Allison, welcome back. Always great to see you. For those who may not be familiar, tell us what PTSD is and who it affects. I know it's commonly associated with those in the military, in particular combat situations, but they're not the only ones who suffer from it.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people kind of discount their own symptoms, thinking it wasn't as bad as being at war. But we would define a trauma as anything that is outside the normal range of human experience, something that we experience as inescapable, and something that overwhelms our ability to cope. So the symptoms you might see in somebody who's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder would be things like emotional numbing, flashbacks of the experience, nightmares, detachment from others, a sense of hopelessness. They're often very easily startled and frightened, very, on guard all the time. So, basically what's happening is when we have any experience, we process the memory, it gets stored in the hippocampus of the brain. But when something is traumatic, we bypass that and it goes to the amygdala of the brain, which is the most primitive part of the brain, is the fight or flight center. And it literally gets stuck there. So when it gets triggered, it's like they're experiencing it all over again. So sometimes going to therapy obviously can help, but I think unless the traumas are identified and treated specifically, sometimes people aren't getting better just talking about it. So I think understanding that, it could be growing up in an alcoholic or abusive household, because think about it, children don't have those coping abilities, so they're more easily vulnerable to trauma. And then people who have been traumatized are also more vulnerable because their coping skills are not necessarily what they need to be. So I think if we can recognize the signs in our loved ones, even the signs in ourselves, there are treatment modalities that are super effective. And, there's hope. There's, you don't have to be stuck with that the rest of your life.
Yeah, and Allison, I'm glad you brought that up about, growing up in an alcoholic family. A lot of people don't think about that. How common is PTSD? And also, what should you do if you or maybe a loved one are experiencing it?
Well, I think it's more, it's interesting you said 7 to 8%. I think it's actually probably higher than that, because a lot of people growing up have had traumatic events. Certainly we look at like sexual abuse, again, an angry or abusive parent. Like I said, seek out therapy. CatholicTherapist.com. We do list treatment modalities. Inquire with the therapist if they indeed do specific trauma treatment. But I think also bringing the faith into it, often inviting Jesus into those memories, is another way of kind of reprocessing them to kind of really realize you weren't alone during that time. Because obviously when somebody's traumatized, they feel very alone and very isolated. So that's part of the process, because ultimately he's our healer. All right. As therapists, we have techniques that work, but I think we really need to bring in the faith. We need to bring in prayer, the sacraments, because those are the things that truly heal us and set us free. He came to set us free, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Allison, what advice would you give to someone, who's struggling with PTSD and maybe they're reluctant to reach out for help for one reason or another? What would you say to them?
I would say don't be ashamed to ask for help. A lot of people are struggling. I think even what we've just been through with the pandemic, again, feeling overwhelmed and inescapable, was certainly outside of our normal range of human experience. So that's been a trigger for a lot of people who may have had trauma in the past. But get help, talk to somebody, because like I said, there are modalities that are available that can be really helpful, and you can be set free again. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We all get our bumps and bruises in life, but when something is traumatic, we really do need some help to get over that in order to be able to be free again. And there's life after trauma, all right? It doesn't necessarily have to define us, because once it's reprocessed, it becomes a distant memory again. I think we all have memories we can think of in the past, and some of them weren't pleasant, but they're not traumatic. right? So when we can kind of like deactivate the trauma using things like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, that's a very popular modality that can be used to help somebody to be able to be free again and to heal from that trauma.
Well, Allison, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. Really important. We appreciate it. Allison Ricciardi, founder and president of CatholicTherapist.com. Thanks again.
You're welcome. God bless.